Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us once again. You can follow me on X. My personal account is @AM Salazar, and of course, we are using @Mexico Daily as the X account, where we try to provide you information, news, analysis about what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. Now, if you all recall, if you follow this show every weekend, we've been very focused on what is happening in Mexico and all these constitutional reforms that are having a major impact on, or some say, on what Mexico's democracy is going to look like in the next years. But also there has been an emphasis on Mexico's economic decisions. And now we have to talk about what is happening in the United States and the impact that this will have, the fact that Donald Trump will be back in the White House. He's back as president of the United States. And what does that mean for Mexico? A lot of interesting decisions were made this week that seem to indicate it's going to be rough waters for the bilateral relationship, not only Trump's decision, but the fact that this week, Ambassador Ken Salazar, U.S. ambassador here in Mexico, came out with some very, very strong warnings. I think that he's warning Mexico, but he's just pointing out that that this strategy of abrazos y no balazos, security strategy of Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador is a failure. It doesn't work. Something needs to change. And he also pointed out that there had been in different moments where their cooperation with Mexico has not been, particularly on security issues, has not been working. So what does this mean that Ken Salazar, the friendly ambassador, an ambassador that was very close to the Mexican government, no longer is speaking in the same diplomatic fashion as he had been a couple of weeks ago? Joining us today, once again, is Gricha Raether. He is the former representative of Dems abroad here in Mexico City, but also he's a really good security analyst. Gricha, welcome to the show. I mean, what's your take on Ken Salazar's comments?
Hi, Ana Maria. Pleasure being here again. Well, I wouldn't necessarily call what he said a warning. It's more rather stating the obvious. And I believe this is something that he believes. We know that the Department of State clearly knows that. But there were always these rumors that somehow Ken was a little bit rogue and not quite towing the line of the State Department when dealing with the 4T and with Morena and with AMLO. So I think being at the end of his stint here as ambassador in Mexico, and going beyond probably this cordial relationship that he, to a point, had with AMLO, and the fact that no longer exists with Sheinbaum, since clearly since he's on his way out, they're not going to really approach him too much until they know who the next guy is going to be. So I think all of this put together basically put him in a position of, you know what, I'm just going to tell you how it is. And this is going to affect bilateral commercial relationship. This is going to affect commerce. It's going to affect security. There's all these repercussions of these decisions that are being made. And I think, especially on the Mexican side, with the judicial reform, I think he basically just came out and said, you guys are making things for us very, very hard.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed out the fact that he's on his way out. I mean, he's literally a lame duck ambassador. And if you also add to the fact that, during these processes, not only in the United States, but also here in Mexico, I mean, she's only been in office for about a month and a half, 6 weeks. So I think there's still a lot of question marks and discoordination in the Mexican government. And obviously that is now happening in the US government, where at least Donald Trump is proposing Senator Marco Rubio, who knows Mexico. He has spoken about Mexico in the past. He's been very critical even of President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador. He's been critical of the way Mexico has handled its security strategy and the Mexican criminal organizations. So you can imagine, both in the United States and here in Mexico, everybody's trying to figure out where, who's responsible for what. And it is still unclear to me who's going to be the U.S. handler for the Mexican government. It's been Marcelo Ebrard, even up to 2 or 3 days ago, who was responding to these attacks. But the Canciller, Juan Ramón de la Fuente, who's the new Secretary of Foreign Relations, has not really been present in the ways you would imagine that a Canciller would be, considering that, the U.S. is the most important U.S. ally or partner, or should be. So I'm still confused in terms of who's going to be handling the relationship. And two, I would understand why Claudia Sheinbaum and her team would not be speaking to Ken Salazar, simply because they know he's on his way out.
Absolutely. I mean, I fully understand and agree that they wouldn't open the door the way AMLO did. They have so many other things to worry about anyways. Then the non-existent conflict with the U.S. right now does really not hold a high priority. Now, the fact that they put Marco Rubio, or they're proposing Marco Rubio for the position that they are, and somebody who has been so explicitly against not only a lot of the crap that goes on in Latin America, but also specifically those who came out of the Grupo de Puebla and Foro de Sao Paulo, the leftist Latin American governments. It's clear that Marco has no tolerance for that, given his Cuban background. So obviously, the way he's going to go against Venezuela, against Cuba, and any other hard left-leaning semi-socialist government or president in Latin America, I think is going to, making them uncomfortable is going to be a big deal. And I think that Sheinbaum's cabinet knows that, and that they are basically preparing for a pretty big red wave that's going to come this way and put a lot of pressure on Mexico.
Well, I don't know I wrote about these statements made by Ambassador Salazar this week, and I'm just not too sure they are preparing, or the team she has around her understands what is coming. And I'm not saying it's fair, but it's just a reality that Donald Trump's going to be brutal with Mexico, and not only on organized crime concerns, but also on trade. And of course, there's the other issue right now floating in the air is that will he impose tariffs on Mexico, as he has threatened all Mexican products entering the United States, or is he just doing this, throwing out these threats as a way of starting negotiations with Mexico, even before the reevaluation or the renegotiation of the USMCA 2026. So, that's why it's so, there is a crisis coming up. Clearly it's coming out. It's not here right now because everybody, is still in shock, I think, in the US, and just starting to kind of restructure what this relationship is going to look like. And it's going to take a couple of months, but that it's coming, and it could be brutal in terms of trying to negotiate with a Donald Trump that doesn't feel he has any contention right now. I don't know. What would you do if you were the Mexican government?
Well, I would probably not act as lethargic as they have been. Clearly, I think internally, they're probably running around like headless chickens and rethinking a lot of their decisions, knowing that, again, I think they do realize, some of them at least do, that a pretty hard hit is coming our way. Now, this is already having macroeconomic implications. I mean, the peso is already losing value against the dollar. There's obviously going to be a harder impact on direct foreign investments as a function of not only this and the possible relationship with the US, but also the restructuring of the judicial system, which obviously gives less judicial and formal and legal certainty to the investors. So again, they have so many hot potatoes up in the air right now in the Mexican government that they probably just said, look, we know bad stuff's coming our way. Let's wait until they have the new guy, and then we'll talk to him and see what we can do. But again, the comment I made recently was the fact that Sheinbaum approached BlackRock CEO and sat down with him to discuss what you and I know is how are the economic leaders of the world going to deal with a rogue Mexico from the perspective of the new power that the US is when it comes in terms to the relationship between Mexico and China, which obviously is heavily cumbersome and uncomfortable for the United States. So what would I do? I would probably do what they're doing, which is just running around and trying to wait where the tiles land before they make any large moves.
And there's other appointments. I mean, we are assuming that Marco Rubio is going to be the person who is going to lead on the U.S.-Mexico relationship, but we have to remind our audience that the Secretary of State is one of the most difficult jobs in the U.S. government because of the different agendas that the U.S. has around the world. I mean, there is still a war in Ukraine. There's still, there is still the issue of what's going to happen with Israel and its war against Gaza and Lebanon. I mean, of course, there's China, Russia. I mean, it's a very big agenda. So I'm wondering if Marco Rubio is going to be, how decisive he is going to be in terms of, figuring out what the State Department's role is going to be with Mexico and Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua. I mean, we assume he is, but I don't know. There's other secretaries out there that could have an enormous impact on Mexico, including the new Secretary of Homeland Security.
Oh man, exactly. I mean, look, I think it's a division of work there, and I think your point is valid. There's a lot of stuff going on between the U.S. and the rest of the world, but I also think, and this is kind of uncomfortable for me to say, but I do think that the Trump effect is going to mitigate at least some of the conflicts around the world. I think that Putin is going to try an approach and say, look, let's come to an agreement. Let's make the agreement be that Ukraine doesn't join NATO in the next 20 years, right? And that's probably the way it's going to go. Of course, you and I know that if when Trump comes to the White House, a lot of the funding for NATO is going to disappear anyway. So there's going to be a weakening where it's probably not even worth for Ukraine usually going in there. So I think that the Russia thing is going to calm down. I think China is going to rethink a lot of their options and actions. I think North Korea is going to stop testing the rockets, probably realizing that now they're really poking at the wasp nest. And I think that Palestine and Israel, given that Netanyahu already offered as a return to the White House present to stop the war, I think things are going to die down on the international or outside of the American sphere. And I do think that Marco is going to have a bit more time than maybe he thought if he were in power right now to deal with Mexico and all the other rogue Latin American countries.
Now, you and I haven't spoken since the elections. Were you surprised? The electoral results?
No, so I predicted in 4 interviews before the election that Trump was going to win, much to my behest. But I was surprised at the speed at which he reached to 70 and the magnitude and difference of electoral votes between him and Harris. I didn't think it would be that far apart. I thought it was going to be maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 electoral votes apart. How quickly he got up there, it was just mind blowing for me. I was in awe.
Now, I mean, there's a lot of analysis taking place as to what happened, but it's clear that support for Trump. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this was their same support for the Republicans in other elections, but the support for Trump really kind of revolved around the immigration issue. That and the wokeness, whatever that means, and you and I, maybe eventually we should talk about this, especially so our Mexican audience kind of understands what that means, because it's this weird concept that conservatives have in the United States regarding social issues, race issues, and the role of diversity in the U.S. In the U.S. society, but immigration, I think, in addition to trade issues, but immigration is going to be in the short term, I think, the big, huge, humongous issue that is going to impact the Mexico-U.S. bilateral relationship.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, because I talked to a lot of my friends in the southern border states, Texas, New Mexico, you name it. And I was like, but are you guys not also worried about fentanyl? And they're like, you know what? Most of us haven't heard about it here. Immigration is the big issue here. So obviously that's where they're going to have to make the big decisions. I think that by June 26, if big decisions haven't been made and big changes haven't been made on the Mexican side, that's, I think, where Trump is going to use that as leverage, as a negotiation tactic, as he did last time, in terms of reaffirming the TMEG. And I don't think he'll hesitate. I don't know about the tariffs. I don't know that he quite understands yet, but I think he will soon, that raising tariffs only affects his own citizens in the US and really doesn't necessarily directly affect Mexican commerce. Plus, I think Ebrard has already threatened to also raise tariffs on American products in Mexico.
Do you think he cares? I mean, seriously, because I was speaking to some colleagues about this, and they're like, assuming that Mexico does that, the impact is so minimum in the United States just because of what we're talking about, the quantities and what it represents for the U.S. economy, for the Mexican economy. I mean, so it just, the fact that Mexico would raise tariffs on U.S. products would just only basically create more inflation in Mexico too, which is something that is also having an enormous impact. And at this point, even the United States, the impact on the U.S. economy, because of the amounts of products that the U.S. does export to Mexico, is in no comparison to the impact that it would have on Mexico's economy. So I'm not too sure Trump really understands, or I'm at this point, what he's doing to his own voters. And maybe they will understand once inflation not only does not go down, but it starts to creep up because of these decisions. But I think in the short run, he's going to go for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think he's going to go for it. He's probably going to just throw a bomb, a first punch, if you will, to kind of instill fear in the Mexican government and say, look, I'm not kidding. And he's done that before. This is right. I mean, there's no way to think that he's not going to do that, because he's done that before. But I also think that he's a populist. He cares what people think. And the one thing that he pounced on the most on Biden was the fact that there was inflation, irrespective of the Dow Jones growing beyond any expectations, regardless of unemployment being as low as it is in the U.S. He still kept on pouncing on Biden for inflation and the bad situation of this almost broken economy. So having said that, and the fact that he is a populist and he doesn't want to be compared or put in the same boat as he did Biden, he's probably going to quickly realize that that's not the way to go. And then he's going to have to wait until 6/26 to reaffirm, possibly renegotiate the TEMEC.
Wow, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a really rough drive for both countries. I mean, I think some of these appointments have suddenly made us realize that the most recent, he hasn't appointed them, but he will be nominating. He's nominating a group of people that are, frankly, it's shocking. I mean, Robert Kennedy as Secretary of Health.
Secretary of Health,
Matt.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's gonna the chaos he's gonna create in the health system. I can't even begin to read. I've read so many articles, and if I put all of those together, he's completely going to tear apart the little and almost non-functional health system that we have in the U.S.
And then, of course, and people are saying, well, does that affect Mexico? Of course it affects Mexico, simply because of the number of nationals, Mexican nationals and Mexican Americans that live in the U.S., and that one way or the other are going to be greatly impacted by some of these decisions. Anyway, there's going to be a lot to talk about. I think we're going to be in business for another 4 years, waking up every morning.
No doubt.
Just waiting for that 6:30 announcement now through X or whatever social media, he decides to use that morning. But it's gonna be a bumpy ride, and it's always great to have you on the show, Gricha, Raether. It's always great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Ana Maria. Thank you for having me.
We're going to go to a commercial break, but I really appreciate you joining us this weekend here on Living in Mexico. Don't go away. We'll be right back.